everyone, and thank you for being here for our April community conversation. I'm Hari-kirtana, and it is a great pleasure for me to be here with you and an honor for me to have you here to participate in our conversation about consciousness. Where does consciousness come from? What exactly is it? And why should we even be interested in the topic of consciousness? I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts on a few of these things. I'll begin by sharing my latest medical update. Actually, it's there's no news there, but I did go to my local medical center recently just to get some routine stuff done, check up on things, see what the story is with this aging body of mine. And part of the test that I had to do involved having an IV. They were doing a scan, and so they needed to colorize my insides, I suppose. And the nurse or the medical professional who put the IV in, she said, okay, this is going to pinch a little bit, just before she put the needle in. And anytime I hear that these days, I just laugh. I think this is really funny, because I'm old enough to remember when this stuff actually hurt. It's like, it's nothing, you know, a pinch is exactly right. And so I'm appreciative of the advances in technology that have made life a little less painful, at least in some respects. And while I am grateful for science and technology from a material standpoint, I have grave misgivings about placing our faith in science and technology to offer us the same kinds of promises of immortality and utopian conditions in the material world that are better pursued on a spiritual level. And I'm going to share just a short statement that my Parama Guru made about this in the preface to his presentation of the Bhagavad Purana, also known as the Srimad Bhagavatam. It goes, "Human society at the present moment is not in the darkness of oblivion. It has made rapid progress in the fields of material comforts, education, and economic development throughout the entire world. But there is a pinprick somewhere in the social body at large, and therefore there are large-scale quarrels even over less important issues. There is need of a clue as to how humanity can become one in peace, friendship, and prosperity with a common cause." So this is why I think the topic is important. Why should we care about consciousness? Because consciousness and understanding the nature of consciousness is the most fundamental thing. It is the most basic thing of our experience. It is certainly the thing we share with every other human being on planet Earth, no matter how else we may differ. And if we can solve our problems on the level of consciousness, then we stand a much better chance of solving our problems that arise from different kinds of consciousness, different qualities of consciousness, and the more superficial elements of differences of opinion, worldview, based on the stuff that's layered on top of consciousness, the mind, the body, and the different kinds of senses of identity that we develop that give a kind of expression to our consciousness in this life. So now I'm going to throw it out there for all of you. Please tell me, when you think of consciousness, what do you think of? What comes to mind? What is consciousness? If you were asked to give a definition of consciousness, what would you say? Please feel free to unmute yourself, share your thoughts on this, or if you want, you can use the raise your hand tool in the reactions, underneath the reactions icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Paula, go ahead.
When I think of consciousness and trying to define it, I think of being aware that we're aware.
I think that's a pretty good definition. Thank you. I am aware, therefore I am aware. Okay. Other thoughts on how we would define consciousness, or our own experience of consciousness? Glenna, go ahead.
The word that comes to mind for me is sentience.
That's a good synonym. Yeah, thank you. In the chat, we hear from Susan, being awake and not in a dream state. There's a lot of layers that we could investigate on that. And I say that because yoga philosophy offers this idea of Maya, of a world that isn't what it appears to be, and uses the idea of a dream state as a metaphor for the condition of our consciousness at this point, and the process of yoga as the process of waking up. So your definition of being awake and not in a dream state, that makes me think of the difference between pure consciousness and consciousness that is affected by the material energy, which I hope to return to later in a discussion of qualities of consciousness, or how consciousness can be affected. From Jill, observing. Yeah, the ability to observe and be aware of what we're observing, and the awareness of ourselves observing. Marjorie, go ahead.
Like Paula, awareness is definitely the word that comes to mind, but then whenever I find myself trying to articulate consciousness, it feels very like slippery and elusive, and then I find myself more confused.
I think understandably so, because even though consciousness is the first and foremost thing we experience, the thing that is closest to us, still there is something about consciousness that's hard to pin down, perhaps in part because we're the only ones that can observe our own consciousness. All right, thank you. Narayani, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting this. It's wonderful. Two quick things. One is that, what I'm learning, I'm studying Vedanta, that consciousness is that which doesn't change, right? That's the simplest thing. That which does not change is consciousness. And then what's interesting when we start talking about the three states, dreaming, sleep, and deep sleep, that mimics the Om, according to like the Mandukya or some of the Upanishads. And so I just heard a lecture by a famous sleep doctor who works with Andrew Weil, who contends that we are a wake-centric society and that the sleeping and the dreaming, those two states are just as important as this so-called waking state, when we're all walking around now thinking that we're conscious and awake, but those three are equal. And then of course, as we know, there is another state, the fourth state, that we're all trying to get to, hopefully.
Thank you so much. This is a really important point, I think, the idea of consciousness as changeless, that we hear this example in the Bhagavad Gita: the body changes from childhood to youth to old age, or hopefully middle age before that, if we're going in sequence. But the idea is that we're aware of ourselves at different stages of life, and we have different priorities, we have different desires, we have different tastes, we have different everything. So many things are changing over the course of our life, but our awareness of ourselves going through these changes is changeless. It does not change. This is, I think, an important aspect of meditation, is to tune in to the awareness that we have that is not changing while the mind is doing its thing, and doing that which we can observe from a changeless place. Anyway, thank you very much for that. A couple of things also popped into the chat from Suzanne. How do we know that we are not in the matrix? So consciousness is really hard to define. Yeah, there are scientists, researchers who are of the opinion that that's kind of actually how it is, or at least that it's possible that the world of our experience is something being recreated, possibly by our own ancestors, and our whole experience of being is totally unreal. From Sarah, we have different kinds of consciousness. However, generally speaking, it is a symptom that the soul is present within the living entity. Yeah, so there's a lot of what we read in Vedic wisdom literature that says consciousness is the symptom of the presence of the soul. And by different kinds of consciousness, I assume you mean like that our consciousness can be affected in different ways, and therefore appear according to the influence of material nature to be this kind of consciousness or that kind of consciousness. From Susan, medically it would probably be defined as non-sensate, but I like the matrix reference. I'd like to know, Susan, elaborate on this a little bit. What do you mean by non-sensate? And while we're waiting for you to elaborate, interesting from Sarah again, interesting that consciousness is changeless. From Narayani, from Advaita Vedanta, non-dual. There's that, that brings up the question of the different schools of thought in Vedanta about duality and non-duality, and whether the individual consciousness that we experience now is illusory, and that there's really only one consciousness, and self-realization involves realizing the absolute unity of consciousness rather than a plurality of consciousness. And the Vaishnava Vedanta schools say, no, there's some duality present as well. In the Chaitanya school that I am connected to, there's the idea of an inconceivable simultaneous oneness and difference. Yet, yes, there is a one universal consciousness. There is Brahman, and at the same time, there is also a categorically different kind of a jiva or atman, who is an individual infinitesimal part of the infinite and universal consciousness. And then there is, so simultaneously, there's this unity and diversity. And for myself, this helps take into account the third element of pramana, or yoga epistemology, how we know something is true, which is that our lived experience is that of being an individual conscious entity. And this is one of the problems of consciousness, is that we are the only ones who experience our own consciousness. And therefore, you can't put it in a lab, you can't measure it, you can't weigh it, you can't empirically observe it. And therefore it falls outside the boundary of scientific inquiry insofar as natural science or material science is concerned. Okay, so from Susan, not being aware and unable to react to external sensations. Okay, I'm glad you qualified that as a medical term, because this gets to something that I wanted to bring up about what the contemporary thinking is about consciousness. So from a medical standpoint, consciousness not being aware, non-sensate, there's this idea that consciousness cannot have an impact on the physical world, or that anything metaphysical cannot impact on the physical world. This gets into some areas of neuroscience. Some neuroscientists believe that the mind is the brain, that there's no metaphysical thing called the mind, that there's just the brain, that there's no immaterial or spiritual being who is conscious, but rather consciousness is a function of the cerebral cortex. And this leads to the ideas we hear in transhumanism, that we'll be able to achieve immortality by uploading the contents of our minds to some computational substrate, and then after our physical bodies are gone, we'll continue to exist. And that presupposes materialism, that we are the mind, that we're not necessarily this physical body, but that our actual identity is the mind. And therefore, if the mind can be uploaded to a machine, then we will continue. I find it curious that the fact that we change our minds over time, that the mind is a dynamic thing, is either not taken into account here, or there is an assumption that with artificial intelligence, our minds will learn new things and develop stuff, and the whole idea of emergent properties. In other words, things can arise out of places where those things don't pre-exist. You can give what you do not have. One of my objections to this whole idea is the idea that consciousness is an emergent property of a chance combination of material elements. An epiphenomenon is one of the words that's used to describe this. What do you all think of this idea? Any thoughts on the whole transhumanism? Consciousness is an emergent property. We can upload our minds and forget the cryo chamber. Disney and Ted Williams, they're all going the wrong way. We can do this without freezing anybody. Any thoughts on this? Michaela says, doubt it, LOL. Marjorie, I don't see the point. I think the point is immortality. And there's a very interesting correlation here between the promise of religion, behave yourself and you get to live in heaven forever, and heaven is either a beautiful place where we all have wings and harps, or it's a place where nothing ever happens, if you believe talking heads, or holy, holy, holy. It's boring if you believe Monty Python. I mean, we've all got our own different conceptions of, what that life everlasting will be, but it's the same promise, which human society seems to have a need for, the promise of an afterlife. And here we have science and technology kind of offering the same message, which is not new. I remember as a kid watching Carl Sagan on Cosmos, and when I look back at it, if you call it up on YouTube and check this out, you'll see that the staging and the imagery and the language, it's all substituting science and technology for religion. Other thoughts about this idea of transhumanism, and also the idea I've introduced here about like how the promise of religion is now being supplanted with the promise of the same kind of thing, but through science and technology. From Narayani, it's what we already are, immortal, just veiled. Yeah, there's that, which points to the idea that maybe there's a different technology we can be employing to experience the immortality we've already got. From Amanda, uploading the mind is a bit reductionist. We are complex organisms, ecosystems. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. Diane, go ahead.
In some reasons, for some reasons, I think it's terrifying to think that we can think that. And in other ways, it's also extremely exciting. As you were talking about medical advances, the where we've come and what we think as everyday normal procedures that you don't even think about. Maybe the same will be true as we emerge and accept some of this new technology, that it will just incorporate into what we think is normal. I mean, I never thought I'd be looking at my phone to look up stuff, and I mean, just at a drop of a hat. And I take that for granted now. But the idea that some of the basics of the wonderful scriptures that we have from various religions may get lost and tangled in this, I think is just one. It reminds me of every change we've ever had facing us. We always resist change. And that's the only thing that's constant. And I think if we come at it from a viewpoint of it has things to offer us, but it also has bad things, like everything does. Mm-hmm. I think it'll be okay. I think we're kind of making a whirlwind in a teapot, or whatever that phrase is. I don't know what the phrase is particularly.
A tempest in a teapot.
There, that's the one. Yeah. So I have both fear and I also have excitement.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yes, it would be nice if things turned out well. Roller coasters are also scary and exciting. You can't pay me to get on a roller coaster these days, but and when everything goes well, the ride ends and everybody is happy. So I hope it'd be nice if you were right. Marcia, go ahead.
Hi, it's Marcia.
Marcia, I was looking at you and like, I know this woman. I know who this is. I haven't seen her in a while, and I remember last time I also got your name wrong. I'm
And
sorry.
that's fine. I've gotten that all my life. Not a
I'm
big
sure. Okay. Anyway, Marcia, thank you so much for being here. It's nice to see you.
Yeah, I have a lot to make up to catch up on the past conversations. But just kind of piggybacking on the idea of an ecosystem, it seems to me, and having spent a lot of my time in a lot of my working years in the scientific arena, um, there's I feel like personally feel like there's something missing because there's not enough uh, there is no attention or no space kind of placeholder for what we don't know, for the unknown, for the potential that um, is yet to be developed. And I think that that's, to me, that's one of the um, flaws in thinking that you can just upload a human brain and whatever you have ever known before you became unhuman, um,
Hmm.
that that's all that that system has. It doesn't have the capacity for the imagination that we have to be able to become aware of new things and kind of blend that with what we know. And it just seems like there's something missing.
Mm. All right. Thank you for bringing that up. Um, that's, for all the talk of, how AI can learn, there's, at least I also still have this sense of, something missing here. And it brings up the question for me, is it possible for something that was not conscious to become conscious? In other words, can consciousness, is consciousness an emergent property, that something that wasn't conscious, a pile of matter configured in this way or that, becomes self-aware? Or is it like you're conscious or you're not? Is it hardwired? Is consciousness hardwired into the universe in a certain way? Which brings me to another branch of science that, if I'm reading it correctly, and of course I'm not a scientist, I have no scientific training, I'm a total layman reading about this stuff. But if I understand it correctly, the quantum physicists, or at least a number of prominent quantum physicists, seem to think the neuroscientists are dreaming. What I've been hearing is that from the quantum physicists that I've been listening to and reading, is that they're saying that there's something beyond computation that accounts for consciousness, that there's no genuine theory of consciousness that connects quantum level physical reality to conscious experience. I have even heard some go so far as to explain that a subatomic particle is not really a particle. It's not like a physical thing that's just smaller than every other physical thing. It's more like a field of information containing infinite possibilities until you look at it, and then it collapses into a particular thing. If I understand this correctly, and if there are any actual physicists in the room who want to set me straight on my understanding, I would welcome their comments. But it was Max Planck who particularly said there's everything points to consciousness, and there's no way to get behind it. It's something beyond physical reality, even at the quantum level, and therefore it's not something that has like a physical property that you can do something about, that it is just hardwired into the universe. And the idea that fields of information across the universe can know what other fields of information are doing gives this idea of a universal consciousness that's just baked into the universe. And if that's the case, then the project of transhumanism is just a misdirected idea. And there's one other thing that I look at in considering which way of thinking about this is probably true. I forgot the man's name, but someone who works in who I believe like invented microprocessors, an older guy, I think he's Italian. He has had personal epiphanies about the nature of consciousness in his own contemplative life that have been so substantial that he set up a foundation to research this because nobody else is researching it. Whereas there's a lot of money going into neuroscience and transhuman research because it's a favorite of the tech bros of Silicon Valley. So, taking Deep Throat's advice, follow the money. If you follow the money, you end up with neuroscience and transhumanism. And that tells me that that's not the way to go. The place where there's no money, where there's no profit to be made, that's, by my way of thinking, that's evidence that a higher truth will be found where there's no money. Whereas where there's profit motive, I'm not so sure. Narayani, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just trying to type it. I was wondering if you meant Edgar Mitchell, the astronaut who, after he had seen the moon, the Earth from space, he came back and founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences. There's also SAND, Science and Non-Duality Institute. Mm-hmm. And these guys are looking at it. And I think there's been many physicists who become sort of Vedantins. Einstein had many samadhi experiences. It goes with the territory, right? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not who I was thinking of. It's someone else with a conspicuously European name and accent to go with it. But yes, I've heard of these other experiences and studies.
Right.
So from Karen in the chat, does consciousness reside in the mind even? That's a good question. It depends on who you ask, I suppose. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna lists 8 material elements: earth, water, fire, air, and ether being the 5 physical elements. In modern parlance, that would be solids, liquids, radiance, gases, and space. Then he lists mind, intelligence, and ego, or identity, as the 3 metaphysical elements. And when Patanjali speaks about chitta, it's usually translated as mind, but it's more than the mind. It's the field, the inner field of awareness that includes all 3 of the elements: the mind, the intelligence, and the ego. And then in the next verse, Krishna makes a clear distinction between all 8 of the material elements, physical and metaphysical, and the individual self. And categorically, the 8 material elements or material energy and the individual conscious being is a spiritual energy. So we have this idea of energies that are both categorized as divine energies, but of 2 different qualities, material and spiritual. And then in the next verse, Krishna says that he is the source of both of these energies. So we have in just very few verses the sum total of reality being encapsulated as Krishna and Krishna's energies. The end. That's everything. Almost using a sense of humor, Krishna starts the chapter by saying, I'm going to explain to you the sum total of reality, after which nothing will be left to be known. And then he does it in just a few verses. This is chapter 7, if you want to look it up. But this material energy of which our bodies and our minds are composed also has this external component called the 3 qualities of material nature, luminance, passion, and darkness, that act as the primary colors on the most metaphysical level of the world of our experience, that create every hue, tint, and shade of every person, place, and thing we experience in this world, including ourselves. And that's the world we live in. A world composed of material energy that our material bodies are designed to interact with and be aware of. So our consciousness is filtered through these material elements. So the answer to the question, does consciousness reside in the mind? As far as yoga philosophy is concerned, the answer is no. That the mind is a filter through which consciousness perceives the material world. And the process of yoga is the process of bringing the mind and senses under the control of higher intelligence, rather than having the spiritual person being ruled by the demands of the mind and senses and simply responding to the material world based on attachments and aversions. But this brings up this idea of, are we living in the matrix? It's a great analogy for our situation according to yoga philosophy, that we're living in a world that appears to be real, and in a sense it is real. And yet at the same time, it is likened to a dream. It's not what it appears to be. Just as our waking consciousness is considered to be more real, what we experience in our waking consciousness is considered to be more real than what we experience in a dream state. Similarly, when we wake up, so to speak, to the contents of the pure consciousness that is experiencing everything through these material filters, that experience is more real than the experience of reality in the material world, our day-to-day, everyday existence. And this is why yoga is understood to be a science of expanding consciousness. Now, in one sense, consciousness cannot be expanded, but our awareness, the bandwidth of what we are conscious of, can be expanded. And that is a subjective science, in that you have to make yourself the subject of an experiment in order to see if the theory holds water. All right, I'm detecting some activity in the chat, so let me see what's going on there. And then if you have any comments or anything that you would like to share based on my wah for the last couple of minutes, then by all means, please comment, raise your hand. Even if you haven't quite figured out like how to articulate whatever question or comment is on your mind, feel free to take a stab at it in real time and see if it comes together.
I'd like to just support my question real quick, if that's okay. This is
Oh,
Karen.
yeah, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So and this might not even make sense, but I'll give it a go. One of my favorite posters I've ever seen of a concert is a Grateful Dead poster.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have a copy of it, or I would share it. And it depicts people watching the concert, and it shows their consciousness going out of their heads and then creating one big consciousness over the whole venue that includes the band and all the people.
Mm-hmm.
That, I don't know, that to me was just so stunning how remarkable we are as humans, that we can join our conscious together and all go up to a higher place.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll be aware of it at the same time. It's like a miracle to me that we can be so separate and yet come together as one for a brief time. And I don't think that can be reproduced technologically. So.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it's a remarkable thing about human beings and consciousness in general, that we have both individual conscious experiences, but the potential for a shared experience is also there. And that we can connect on that kind of level. And it makes perfect sense to me that that kind of thing could be triggered by a Dead concert. All right, Karen, thank you so much. Marcia, isn't consciousness omnipresent? Interesting question. Yes, according to the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna is describing the nature of the jiva or the atman, the spirit soul, one of the things he says is present everywhere. And I understand that on two levels. My experience of yoga tends to be very both and rather than either or. Krishna makes a distinction between two categories of being. One being us. And the idea that in every place there is consciousness or unlimited conscious beings throughout every place. Like I look out now out my window out to the woods, and I know that if I dig up a square foot of earth, there will be more living beings in that square foot of earth than there are human beings on planet Earth. I look at the air around me, and of course I see right through it, but just because I don't see consciousness or conscious beings everywhere, or a conscious being everywhere, doesn't mean they're not there. Which brings us to the second category of being, which is universal consciousness as opposed to localized consciousness. Krishna speaks of the field and the knower of the field. In fact, it just so happens I have these verses handy because I thought they might come in handy. Marcia, thank you for giving me a nice segue into them. In the 13th chapter, Krishna has this to say about consciousness. Starting with verse 33, just as all-pervading space does not, due to its subtle nature, mix with anything, the self does not mix with the body, though situated in the body. So this comes back to the idea of this consciousness in the mind, and Krishna says, no, separate category of thing. Then in the next verse, Just as the sun alone illuminates the whole world, the soul who resides within the field of activities, the body, illuminates the entire field. There's an interesting measurement, or at least a metaphor given to illustrate the size of the soul, or the Atma. If you take the tip of a hair and slice it into 10,000 pieces, then take one of those pieces and slice it into 10,000 pieces, one of those tips, 10,000 divided by 10,000, that's the size. Which gets us down about to the size of a subatomic field of information with infinite possibilities. And now you once again have a nice kind of connection between how quantum physicists think about consciousness and a conscious universe and an all-pervading consciousness throughout the universe, and how Vedic wisdom literature thinks of consciousness. Then in the third of the three verses I pulled out, those with eyes of knowledge who can see the difference between the field, the body, and the knower of the field, the self, and who can understand the process of liberation from the influence of material nature, how to get out of the matrix, attains the supreme. So there's this idea that we're not in a natural place for pure consciousness. We're in a place where consciousness is being affected by and filtered through material nature in such a way that we do not experience ourselves as we truly are, or in our state of pure consciousness. Let me go to the chat and see what's going on over there. Curious from Amanda. Curious as to the role of creativity in consciousness. Creativity begins with consciousness. In a logical sequence of events, you must first be conscious before you can experience a creative impulse or acquire talents and skills that allow you to express your creative impulse in this or that way. And we're drawn towards a particular kind of creativity by virtue of how material nature is affecting our consciousness. And one theory of consciousness in yoga is the idea that universal consciousness is the source of inspiration. And we hear this from great artists. We hear Mozart say, I'm not making this stuff up. I hear it and I just write it down. Over and over again, prodigies, people who just have genius level talent for this or that thing, often do not take credit for it as if it's like something they created themselves. It's like somebody else put this in my head and I'm just the messenger, that sort of thing. So Amanda, I hope that addresses that relationship. If you have anything to follow up, please just go ahead and unmute yourself.
Well, I find it interesting in the discussion of, especially where we're at with artificial intelligence right now, and sort of trying to pull apart what makes us sort of special in being able to be generative. And I agree entirely that this is necessarily what we can't avoid is our connection between our physical senses and how we respond to them. But that thread of creativity is something that, having explored these AI technologies to try to do my bidding, they just they can't seem to do that. And there's this kind of leap between maybe what the transhumanists are trying to achieve and that big piece of the puzzle. I'm like, well, it's that creative exchange they're not getting at. So I was just curious. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You know, we tend to, it's tempting, I should say, to conflate thinking with consciousness or calculation with consciousness, because it appears to be conscious. So when I'm in Photoshop and AI helps me just get rid of an inconvenient object in the background, that's great. I'm really happy they came up with that. It makes my life so much easier. But it doesn't make me think that Photoshop has become conscious because it can do that calculation. But the more sophisticated the calculating, the more it looks like consciousness. And therefore, something that mimics consciousness can be mistaken for consciousness itself. Anyway, thank you very much. Let me see, what else do we have going on? Do emotions have a place in or effect on consciousness? We are conscious of our emotions. The mind, in conjunction with the heart, is the seat of emotion. So thinking and feeling and willing, those things all kind of go together. And we identify with our emotions. That is our tendency. I feel like this. I feel like that. And there's something dispassionate about the idea of stepping back and observing our emotions. That sometimes can be very, very helpful, sometimes can feel very, very artificial, sometimes can take the form of spiritual bypassing, where we think, oh, I shouldn't be feeling like this because if I was a higher, more evolved spiritual being, then these things wouldn't affect me, therefore I'll pretend not to feel like this. Not very helpful, in my opinion. So yes, our emotions affect our consciousness to the extent that we identify with our emotions. In that sense. In another sense, no, because consciousness is separate from the mind and therefore separate from thinking and feeling. And we can observe our thoughts. We can think, last week I felt like this week I feel like that, and next week I'll feel this way. So there's a relationship certainly between emotions and consciousness. But consciousness proper, once again, remains something distinct from the activities of the mind and of the heart. At least that's how I understand it. Dominique, thank you so much for your question there. And Susan, thank you for naming the physicist I was trying to remember the name of earlier, Federico Fagan, the Italian physicist who worked with microprocessors and now investigates consciousness. Yes, thank you. That's there are numerous interviews with him on YouTube, and if you're interested, you can check them out. From Suzanne, so can only adults be conscious? No. Not only are children conscious, but you could say, and yoga philosophy certainly does say, that all sentient beings, getting back to Glenn, I think it was your definition, all sentient beings are conscious and therefore are living beings that are spiritually equal with all other beings. Which is why we hear in the Bhagavad Gita, a wise person sees someone who is learned and gentle, someone who is in an elephant body, someone who is in a cow body, someone who is in a dog body, and someone who eats dogs, all with equal vision, samadharshinaha, all equal spiritually. So all living conscious beings are understood to be spiritual beings like you and I. The difference is material. I'm in this body, you're in that body, a flea is in a flea body. Better luck next time, flea. And as our consciousness is elevated through the process of yoga, we tend to not see the flea so much as a flea, being a flea, as being a person in a flea body. We see our cat as a person in a cat body, a deer as a person in a deer body, etc. All right. Suzanne, thank you. Narayani, purification of body, mind allows the unveiling. Yoga is the technology we are so blessed to have. I'm inclined to agree that thinking of yoga as a technology for self-realization, for experiencing pure consciousness, I think that's a better technology than material science and technology. Susan, didn't Jung argue for a collective consciousness? I believe so. There's an idea, and you will find this in Sankhya philosophy also. When you look at an org chart of the discernment of material elements, when you work your way up, you get to this idea of collective consciousness as well as individual consciousness. At some point, it breaks out into something similar to Plato's essences, called, starts with a T. Anyway, I forgot what it's called, but the essence of cowness before you get cows, the essence of sky-ness before you get the sky, etc. Tanmatras, that's what they're called. But yes, there is collective consciousness, and there is universal consciousness, and there is also individual consciousness, all of which are called tattvas, or features of reality. Okay, we have just a couple of minutes left. Is there anything else that you would like to share about what we've talked about today, or anything that we haven't covered? All right, I'll accept this as universal satisfaction for at least the time being. But if you have follow-up questions or comments, then I would be very happy to hear. Marcia, you're unmuted. I'm betting that means you'd like to share something.
Yeah, I was just wanted to share an observation. When I first joined, I wasn't able to turn on the video or unmute, and started to experience these feelings of frustration, thinking something was wrong with my computer. And then about a minute or so later, a little notification popped up that said something about AI, and I had to agree in order to be able to unmute and show my video. So I thought it was really appropriate for this conversation.
Yes,
It was
permission from
annoying and a
AI
little
to.
frightening.
That's pretty funny. Yes, Zoom is all AI'd and agreeing with their AI situation precedes the ability to speak about AI. Thank you very much. All right, thank you all for being here, for participating in this conversation. Next month, I'm looking forward to hearing from you as to what you would like to discuss, and I'm looking forward to seeing you all again soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day.